All right. So, what's up, Will?
How's
This
it going?
is Matt and Will here. This is part of the Fiverr Business Marketing Evolution Summit. I'm Matt Clunan. I am Senior Director of Brand Marketing at Fiverr. And we're going to be talking to my friend Will. Will is the VP of Growth at Roman, I believe. But Will, do you want to introduce yourself?
Certainly, yeah. My name is Will Flaherty. I'm the VP of Growth at Row. We are a direct-to-consumer telemedicine service. We operate digital health clinics that connect patients to physicians. A physician can help treat a condition, provide guidance, and if necessary, write a prescription. We then operate pharmacies that will send that medication that a physician prescribes directly to one's door. And then recently, we've even expanded our capabilities into at-home care. Developing new technologies and services that allow for at-home services to come to you and be part of that comprehensive journey of care. We have three main brands: Roman, which focuses on men's health; Rory, which focuses on women's health; and Zero, which is a service for smoking cessation.
Awesome. Well, Will and I go way back, so there's probably a million things we could talk about. But today we're going to talk about really humanizing your brand voice. Obviously, a lot has happened over the last year for the world and how the impact that it's had on both Fiverr's business and on Row's business. But I guess I want to just first start off by just talking at a high level how has the COVID situation started to kind of impact Row's business?
Yeah, I mean, I think that like probably so many of us, the first month of COVID it's kind of like a shock to say, well, how is business going to change? How's our work life going to change? How are our lives going to change, right? And I think after that kind of initial wave in March of trying to take stock of what was going on, I think we really started to see really positive signs and trends, largely because telemedicine was built for this type of moment. The ability to connect with a physician, from the comfort of your own home, was something that we always thought had utility and value even before COVID. But I think the circumstances that COVID kind of wrought on all of our lives, I think even more firmly underscored the value of telemedicine and the ability to access a physician at one's convenience. And so those tailwinds have really fueled us and helped drive a lot of the prioritization of kind of new products, new services to launch, and how we can ultimately better service the healthcare needs of Americans through our platform and our technology.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I guess, this wasn't something that you guys predicted or expected. Has it kind of shifted or changed, product plans or kind of like business plans, or really kind of like where you were taking the business or the kind of higher level direction that you want to kind of take the business?
Yeah, I mean, a couple things have come into play. One, we've said we want to, first of all, find ways to respond to this crisis using our platform. So back in March, we actually had kind of an all hands effort to build out a coronavirus triage tool, if you will. So it took in, kind of different symptoms that one might be experiencing. If they were consistent with what a clinician would understand might be COVID, would actually facilitate a referral then over to a doctor or a healthcare provider or a hospital, even if someone's symptoms were severe enough. And so, I think first and foremost, we tried to find ways to do that. We're in the process of preparing to launch at-home COVID testing. So we've announced a partnership with a few with a manufacturer there to help us bring those products to market once they're approved by the FDA. So a lot of things that we've done simply just to respond to the crisis using the tools and the platform that we have, but it's also, I think, accelerated our thought about where the future of care is going, and at home being a big component of that. So we actually, in December, acquired a company called WorkPath. WorkPath has built out this incredible kind of API and backend infrastructure to facilitate at-home care, whether that means sending a home health aide to one's house, maybe sending a phlebotomist to draw blood for diagnostic testing, a bunch of different use cases that all come into play of how does a provider come to one's home, because telemedicine can help treat a number of conditions without any type of physical interaction, but there's still plenty of conditions in healthcare that require some type of physical input. They require a blood test, a urine test, maybe they require an actual visit from a healthcare professional, a real direct interaction. And so knowing that for our platform to really treat the broader range of conditions that people will always need help with, that we needed to be able to offer that connection to at home, and that really kind of completed the full gamut of services, and ultimately lets us treat more people for more things.
Yeah, that's awesome. I didn't realize you were pushing as far in that direction. But I guess as a you know before that, COVID has probably influenced people's ability to kind of consider telemedicine, and then that's probably in turn going to cause them to reconsider in-home care. So it makes sense that that's kind of a natural progression. Like, hey, it's a lot easier to pick up my phone and talk to a doctor than it is to get in my car, go wait, and be exposed to kind of the potential COVID risks. And then I guess in those, that doesn't treat everything like you're saying, but in those instances where you need to physically be in front of a doctor, whether it's for something, having them come to you is easier than going to them.
And Matt, you make
So
a
that's
great
interesting.
point too, in that drawing it back to marketing a little bit. The crisis has, in many cases, led to people having their first experience with telemedicine. And so when we think about what we were saying before COVID, some of the messaging and value props that were used are really explaining, what is telemedicine, why is it more convenient, why is this a different way, a different, pathway to care that you should consider. A lot of that basic education we don't have to do anymore. In essence, COVID has made telemedicine much more mainstream, much more acceptable. It ultimately has, I think, lowered some of the barriers to testing or trying some of these services for the first time.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. But I guess on top of that, how were you approaching, you know, marketing telemedicine in general prior to this, and then how are you kind of pushing that now, knowing that, the relationship between a doctor and a patient is personal, and you have to be sensitive to the things. Like, I know that I believe Rose's first product was Roman, which was the erectile dysfunction thing. It's not easy to just, you know, flat out say what you guys are marketing. Like, there's some sensitivities around, marketing language, and then also, like, people will be sensitive about purchasing that product. So I guess, how have you approached kind of, I guess, tone and, the sensitivities around marketing?
Yeah, I think one of our big tenets as a company is seeing a patient at eye level, right? So being empathetic, understanding what's motivating them to seek treatment. And in many cases, it could be a cultural or societal pressure. It could be a personal pressure. It could be just a motivation to improve one's health, improve the quality of one's relationships. A healthy sex life has a ton of impact on the quality of one's relationship. And so I think those motivators have always driven people to seek care. And I think what we want to do is we want to be empathetic to that and the kind of conditions that they come to us. We don't ever want to make light of it, right? So there are, of course, as one can imagine, plenty of kind of poor taste humor directions that one could go in marketing some of these more stigmatized conditions. And we steer away from those because we don't think that anybody who's really in the market for that type of product wants to be spoken to in that way. And so, we really focus on empathy, putting the patient first. And we think that then helps build trust, right? And you think about, what sets a brand apart. And in our case, we need a consumer to really, trust that we are going to take care of their private healthcare information, and that we're going to treat their condition in a really effective way, that they can build a rapport and a connection with a healthcare practitioner. And so for all those things, we have to make sure that our marketing messages reinforces, instills that sense of trust, rather than do anything that might detract from it, right? So that's why when we think about messaging, we try to put our patients, our members front and center. If we can use their voice, their testimony, make it relatable to someone, and make the service relatable, right? Knowing that the conditions that we treat, whether it's hair loss, erectile dysfunction, adult acne, there are in many cases tens of millions of people in the country that suffer from these conditions. So they are commonplace. Letting people know at this time when many of us are alone and much more alone than we normally are, that we're here. There are other people that are suffering, but I think most importantly, there's a way to seek help, and that it doesn't require much more than taking a leap and trusting us to be good stewards of one's health.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. And I guess with that though, the focus on kind of like empathy and trust, knowing you, knowing your background, knowing that it's very kind of like performance oriented in the way that you're approaching things. How are you thinking about, I guess, the marketing funnel of trust and like, knowing that like if you're trying to build a reputation of trust, it's going to take longer to build that trust with a potential, user of any of the products that you guys are selling. How do you think about that in terms of like the marketing funnel? Like, how do you put a dollar value on the trust or the empathy piece?
I think it's hard to put an immediate dollar value to, but I do think to your question, how do you build it and what are the mechanisms to do so? I think it's important to note that you can only build up so much trust by telling someone to trust me, right? So if you're speaking from your brand's voice and saying, hey, we're Roman or we're Fiverr, trust us for your needs, we'll take care of you. Like there have to be some signifiers and indicators that help build that trust, right? So whether that be customer testimony, affiliating yourself with other brands that are trusted, right? So we think about in our business and for the Roman business, we've had a long kind of sponsorship relationship with Major League Baseball. That's a highly trusted brand amongst sports fans, amongst baseball fans. And so us aligning with those other brands, that helps people feel like we're not just a fly-by-night company, right? We're not some kind of random faceless online service, but we're a real large, trustworthy entity. I think those types of steps have all the more importance in the early stage of the business, but then it's important to continue building trust through those types of levers. But in essence, the real way to build trust is you need to have other people speak to why you're trustworthy, not just yourself. And so there are a couple of ways, whether it's aligning with other brands, elevating your customers, having them do that speak, that kind of rhetorical work for you, having other trusted experts. So in the case of you think about, let's say in the dental care space, the reason that so many toothpastes have a ADA, an American Dental Association seal, is because that seal is valuable. Customers realize, hey, if dentists recommend this must be a good product, right? So there are many different ways that kind of expertise kind of voice can manifest in your brand. But in essence, to really build trust, you've got to have other people speak to you. You can't solely speak to it yourself.
Yeah. So I guess with all of that said, how do you encourage, users of your product or, doctors or whatever to spread that message and like to promote these things? Is there efforts going into, kind of referral programs and things like that? Or how are you encouraging existing row, users to share the word?
Yeah, I mean, we've got, multiple people in our team that are focused on really just connecting with our member base, surfacing stories, finding people that are willing to share and excited to share and want to talk about how Roman has helped transform their healthcare journey, right? And so it requires a lot of work. You got to have people with their ears to the ground, listening to customers. But these stories, they if you know where to look, right? You look in, you make sure you go through your customer care contacts. If you have a CSAT or kind of net promoter score survey input, there are ways to kind of automate and streamline those touch points. Once you get them, you've got to build up a rapport. And speaking about trust, you've got to then feel you've got to have these members feel comfortable enough for you to actually convey their story in an appropriate way, particularly for a condition like ours that's or the conditions like ours that may be a little more stigmatized. But ultimately, I think it's just you have to have your ear to the ground and look for these stories amongst your member base, at least to start, and really just to kind of nurture those relationships to the point that you can come up with a really great way to convey that story to the broader world.
Yeah. So I guess in kind of like uncovering these stories and journeys and finding these things to share and finding these advocates, has there ever been any kind of like aha moments where like you kind of like really saw something succeed that you were kind of surprised by, just something like really positive that you guys didn't expect as a result of like, kind of humanizing these things?
Yeah. I mean, I think that we did this, for example, with some of our hair loss offerings on Roman. We pulled together a TV ad that had real customers just talking about their experience. I think the beauty of that is you also have the element of not only them speaking to their great experience in again terms that if the brand said it themselves, it would be a little harder to believe, or it just wouldn't come with the same gravitas. But in that case, there's also the opportunity for them to really, show what Roman's done for them, right? Like, they're there on camera. They're kind of proud to be on camera, right? If you think it's a condition that is one where people are concerned about their appearance, right? They seek hair loss treatment for many reasons because they're thinking very consciously about their appearance, and so that folks have the confidence to come on camera and speak to the service. There's kind of a duality. It's not just what's being said, but it's also what's being seen that ends up being really, really powerful. And so I think that it was this beautiful combination of really effective messaging, telling really powerful stories, but also things that really helped drive the business forward too.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. That's a good point that I didn't even think of. That, yeah, they feel the confidence in their appearance post, hair loss treatment that, they're willing to kind of like spread the word. So I think that's great. I guess on the opposite side of that question, are there things that you guys have tried that have not gone so well, or that you were kind of like excited about and put time and money and resources into that, didn't kind of bring the trust or maybe even potentially took away from the trust you were building?
Yeah, we haven't had a ton that really I can think of that were super decretive to trust. We're always careful about that. But, I think one thing we've tried to figure out is how do we elevate our clinicians and trying to find the right balance and tone of that. We think that the physician relationship is important. And in our space, it's really important to let people know that there is a healthcare professional on the other end, right? When you go to a telemedicine service like ours, even if your visit is asynchronous, right? So if you're maybe providing your healthcare information, then it's later reviewed by a physician. Some folks might go through that experience and just think that there's a robot on the other side. And there's not. There's a real physician licensed in your state or healthcare professional licensed in your state who's going to really review your information and interact with you. And so I think that's another thing that we really want to, we haven't quite found the right kind of creative formats, but we want to continue to make sure that the physician and the role of physician is really clear, at least in our experience, because we think, again, that's when many people are coming from a world where they're used to going to the doctor, they may have built up a relationship with a specific physician over many, many years. We want to try to do what we can to get as close to that as possible in the virtual experience. We feel that we can, certainly, and we're continuing to evolve the product to make that even easier and more effective. But again, it's always important to remind and reinforce to prospective members the role of our physicians and how they can really help guide one's course of care.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. Cool. I guess kind of shifting gears a little bit. Healthcare, obviously being sensitive, obviously being a highly regulated industry. How do you kind of adhere to all the guidelines while still being kind of like transparent in how you're positioning this product and all of this?
Yeah. We've invested at a company level a ton of time and effort into building structures to help make sure that every piece of content that we put out, whether that's an email, a TV ad, social ad, it's been reviewed by a physician and reviewed by a legal professional, right? So we think that's really important in our space. There are a lot of people that are operating in ways at times that kind of fly in contravention of what the what regulators might say, and in many cases, our space is a gray area. A lot of the regulations around prescription drugs and telemedicine, either don't exist or have been written for a time that well precedes kind of the current times we live in. So there is a lot that we need to do to just make sure that we feel really comfortable with everything that's going out the door. And so that's been our response. We think it's an important area to invest in. And we want to make sure that that's kind of how we can ensure ultimately that everything that's going out is something we can stand behind.
That's crazy. So every single piece of content that you guys are pushing out is reviewed by legal and by a physician.
Correct. Yeah. And I think back to, times maybe in a past a past world at a place where Matt and I worked, and we were, on the social team or the search team, or we'd be writing copy as channel managers, right? And so there's a certain flexibility and value maybe that is lost, but I think in our space it's just ultimately it's critical that things go through that. So it may at times ever so slightly reduce the volume of output that we have, but I think we found really great ways to streamline that process, and ultimately it's not a hindrance.
Yeah, no, that was kind of my next question, is that, how have you made sure that, despite these kind of like checks that you have to go through with creating content and sharing content, you guys still want to be someone that can act quickly and do things, when you want, not have to wait for this whole long process. So like, are there processes that you've put in place to kind of streamline these things or fast track them when needed? Because knowing that, there's going to be opportunities that you want to jump on right away and that you can't wait.
Yeah. I think one thing we've done is we've thought about how do we, and this can kind of go for any kind of quick turn, highly iterative process. We've actually embedded lawyers and medical professionals into our creative process, right? So there's almost like a dedicated person we can go to for quick turn advice. And when you do that, if you think about that relative to, whether that be medical and legal guidance, or if, let's say you wanted to really speed up the process of creating paid social assets. But, in the same way, we've created what we call kind of a pod. We've got, one strategist working with one copywriter and one designer. And those three people can work really, really closely together. And they are, they're kind of the main three people that are driving the output, right? So it's not that it has to go through a long process. We obviously pull in the medical and legal folks when that output is done to get it confirmed. But I think there are ways that when you think about kind of repetitive, quick turn work, how can you reduce the number of people that need to have a say in it or review it or have stake in it, at least at some stage, right? Maybe in this case, that quick pod produces a lot of creative that is then reviewed by kind of our medical and legal teams. Rather than putting that review at the very outset, you can actually increase your speed. So I think there's always room for process optimization, just thinking a lot about how you can really speed up iteration and attach resources closely to the output that's done. The closer you can do that and reducing the number of people that need to the kind of levels and steps of approval is a way to really help, I think, drive more velocity on any type of project.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I'm sure it's something that has taken time to improve that process, because I'm sure at times where it's, when you're starting off with something like that, you don't even know who has to see something, or, does this need to be reviewed? Does this not need to be reviewed? Why is it taking so long? Like all of these questions. But once, I guess, process is established that fits all of these, legal and health kind of guidelines.
And certainly I think it's a circumstance that comes into play much more for larger organizations, right? If it's a smaller organization, there simply aren't a lot of other people to weigh in. But as an organization grows, how do you make sure that decisions are accelerated, right, and that things don't get bottlenecked up? And that becomes a bigger and bigger, I think, challenge as a leader of a team. Really, in essence, is how do you find ways to make sure that things are streamlined and moving quickly? And a lot of that is by making sure that decisions can be made at any level.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I guess as part of that kind of like creative process where, developing these pods and whatnot, are you guys, I'm sure you're doing tons of research and kind of like learning from your customers what's important, what do they want to hear? Are you also using kind of healthcare professionals as kind of a source of that creative discussion? And, these are our doctors, they're talking to our patients, they know what patients are saying. Is that information used to kind of inform creative decisions and messaging and tone and kind of like how you're building that trust?
I can use an example, in our we have a couple of different medicated skincare offerings on our Rory and Roman brands. And, that's one thing where we've really listened a lot to customer feedback. And, we found, and it's specific to each brand, but for the Rory brand, the consumer is very discerning. They know and understand a lot about prescription retinols. They are interested in, very often kind of modifying their their dosage and working with the healthcare professional to figure out, what's the appropriate dose for their needs and their skin's needs. And so that's a much more discerning audience that, for example, would care a lot more about the different types of ingredients that might be included in one's kind of prescribed formulation, right? And so there's more than almost less initial education and more kind of detail that we would then provide in marketing. And so that a lot of that comes out of the clinician interactions, understanding what our doctors are hearing, what they're saying, what consumers are looking for, and then really kind of modifying and iterating the product and how we speak about it based on all that.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I guess it's such a, healthcare or whatever is such a personal thing that different customers are going to want different levels of detail throughout this process. One person might just be sold on seeing an ad. Another person might really want to dig in to know exactly what they're getting into, what they're signing up for, reading through terms and conditions. So I guess it's, from a marketing perspective, it's being prepared for all of those different scenarios and knowing that you have the information needed to speak to that person who doesn't need much information and that person who really wants all of that information.
Totally. Yeah. And then, there's the balance of identifying the segments and kind of knowing who those people are, then creating that. And then I think most importantly, then how do you actually act on that segmentation, right? How do you actually make sure you're speaking to those people? It's a lot easier maybe in a channel like email where you know a lot about your members, a little harder in some of the paid channels where you have a little less fine-tuned control around what you're saying. But it's something that comes up for us a lot is, we've identified the segments. We have a couple different threads of messaging that we think match each segment. Then let's go execute against that. How do we actually get that message in front of the right people at the right time? And so kind of all those things ultimately need to be working for it to really be most effective.
Totally. I guess on that kind of point of balance and whatnot, obviously, healthcare being personal, being private, how do you kind of balance the kind of respect or kind of like, I don't know what the right way to phrase this is, your users' desire for discretion while building brand, like while building the kind of recognition and loyalty around.
Yeah, I think it's about being thoughtful in how we exercise discretion relative to not, right? So one important thing for us is all of our shipments go in discrete, unmarked packages, right? So on one hand, one would say, well, we want to have Roman all over every box. You think about an Amazon box and how the branded Amazon Smile box showing up in your, let's say in your apartment building's vestibule or whatever, it's really helped build this omnipresence of Amazon or Jet or Chewy or any of these other kind of high volume e-commerce brands. There's a lot of reason why one would want to do that. We consciously say, hey, listen, this is not a place where we want to be loud because we think that the consumer more deeply values that discretion and us sending this in relatively discrete packaging comparative to any type of value that we could get from excessively branding the box, right? And so I think what we do is we think about that touch point, that trade-off in as many places as we can, right? So that would mean, for a channel like direct mail, we'll do different things when we're speaking to the ED condition than we would for skincare or some of our OTC offerings, right? And so I think it's just being really thoughtful, putting yourself in the shoes of the prospective member or the active patient and understand, what would feel comfortable, what wouldn't feel comfortable, what would they want, and really starting that as the basis for how you build out the communication streams and how you weave in the brand in certain moments.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I guess it's putting yourself in the shoes of what it would be like for someone kind of receiving that package or receiving that direct mail or receiving that letter. I guess kind of like makes it easier to imagine what you would want to do. I guess it's you kind of learn over time, and as you kind of keep pushing these things, you're probably getting smarter and better about that. But yeah, that makes sense. And then I guess there's plenty of opportunities to put your brand out there in a non-personalized way. I thought that was a flag behind you, but I'm realizing that's the hood of a NASCAR car. So I guess there's places where you can really push those brand colors, that kind of logo. So I guess how have you thought about kind of like these bigger opportunities? You touched on MLB before, but like you have this personalized kind of direct messaging to people, but then you have these big brand statements. So I guess how have you thought about these big brand statements?
I think for us, the one thing that we realize is, our many of our offerings have target populations in the tens of millions of people, right? So think about some brands that have very, very tightly focused audiences, right? That's why you see, luxury clothing brands advertising in fashion magazines, right? Because the people that are buying and reading fashion magazines are part of this very small catchment of potential buyers. In our world, breadth is important and scale is important. And so, that's one reason we've gravitated to a lot of sports partnerships, whether that be our relationship with Major League Baseball, whether that be some of the things we've done in the NASCAR space. You see, yes, Matt, you did correctly identify that as the hood of a NASCAR car that ran in the Coca-Cola 600 last May. And so, what we've done is we've always just tried to think thoughtfully on where's our audience, how can we reach them, and how can we reach them in a way that's impactful and meaningful and ultimately adds a little more depth than just running a spot, right? So when we think about the baseball partnership, we've gotten so much value out of our relationship with MLB because we've been able to enhance our marketing messaging, right? We might already want to be advertising in a baseball event because it's a high, it's a large audience, core target demo. There are a lot of reasons why we'd want to be present, but we think by kind of adding in this relationship with baseball, the marks and the IP and kind of forging this deeper affiliation, that helps reinforce and really make our assets and our kind of normal media we'd buy anyways more effective. In the same way with NASCAR, right? Like we tied in kind of promotional activity from the driver of the car. We did a lot of kind of media in that particular race to kind of bring attention to the fact that we were sponsoring the car in the race. And so it's more about thinking about how these things are additive if we do something that's kind of a larger execution rather than one-off. They all have to work together and ultimately build to a greater kind of sum of parts than if we were kind of thinking about them as one-off executions.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. And I imagine it's kind of cool to see this kind of build out with like MLB. It's obviously a big deal to be an official sponsor of Major League Baseball, but what else can you do with that sponsorship? What does that give you the leverage to do, and how can you work with players? How can you do local activations? When fans are kind of in the stadiums and things like that. How can you work with past players, things like that? So I think you guys have done a lot of interesting things there, and I'm sure do more interesting things in the future in sports, outside of sports. And yeah, that's great.
No doubt about it. Yeah, I think it's all about, you have to find value that makes sense for your brand. I think through all these things, it's important to just note, it's like, you do have to think about the objectives, right? For some people, sports advertising really makes a lot of sense because it helps them reach a smaller, high value audience, right? If you think about, why is every, club or suite section at an arena sponsored by a luxury car brand or a financial services firm? It's because that they know that the folks that are interacting with that experience are both highly concentrated in their target demo and also likely to be very valuable to that business, right? So, one person buys a luxury car, that's, thousands of or tens of thousands of dollars of profit for the manufacturer and the local dealer. And so it explains why people go after these things. So I think through all these things, you have to think about, what is the audience and what's the right vehicle to reach your audience based on whether it's you have a very, small, tightly defined, locally constrained audience, or you have a big, large, broad national catchment as we do.
Awesome. I guess kind of off of that, you have different brands with under kind of the Row brand. How do you think about creating kind of a language that speaks to each of these individual brands, but at the same time laddering up to one brand? A partnership for Major League Baseball might not make the most sense for Rory, but how do you kind of think about creating a unified brand voice and then also kind of like making kind of specific voice for each of these verticals?
Yeah, I think, first and foremost, I think we realize that, they're different. Everyone has different healthcare conditions and healthcare needs. And we found a lot of success speaking to specific needs, right? So we think about Roman and kind of where we started, and then some of the things we've done with Rory around skincare and some aesthetic conditions. I think we've really focused on positioning the brand to speak to needs. And so I think that will continue. At the same token, we really think that Row is important. It's important for our members to understand kind of what Row is, have a little more uniformity around the interactions with the pharmacy, interactions with physicians. And so, we're kind of constantly thinking about how we can improve that architecture and think about that, and a lot of work we're doing right now to improve that. But really, I think that's the essence. Is these brands are, I think, really powerful marketing vehicles to speak to a prospective member about a real discrete pain point, and then we think about how do we bring those people then into the broader Row ecosystem, which I think really speaks to our providers, our pharmacy, our care, and some of the other kind of platform level attributes and services that kind of would touch any condition we launch, whether it's or any brand that we would support, whether it's Roy or Roman or something we'd launch in the future.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. And was this kind of always the way you've approached it, or was this kind of like a learning experience? Was this kind of what you've settled on as the best kind of way to structure it? You said you're always looking to improve it, but I guess has this been attempt one, or is it one of many attempts?
I think like any good brand, it's iterative. We're always kind of constantly improving. I mean, the business, as you called out earlier in the conversation, we started as Roman. The business started as Roman, which is a single focus on the treatment of a single healthcare condition, erectile dysfunction. And so we've grown that now to be treating, over 20 different healthcare conditions and kind of constantly thinking about areas we'll expand before. So, at a certain point, relatively fairly on, we realized that we needed to create a brand architecture that supported us expanding into things beyond men's sexual health. And so that's kind of how we settled on the Row structure, and then kind of that facilitated the creation of Rory, Zero, and some of these other brands. And so ultimately, I think that's it's always going to evolve, and we need to make sure in the long run we build a brand architecture that supports all the types of things we would want to do in the next 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. And so putting a lot of time and effort to that right now to kind of get that balance right. But we think it's kind of a definitely a progression towards always towards kind of a better outcome as we go and think about improving.
Awesome. Yeah, I guess anything else interesting that you're looking forward to, or all of that? I think we're almost out of time here.
Yeah, I mean, I think like so many of us, very interested to understand, what are the changes in human behavior that have that COVID has made more permanent, and those that have that are going to be more transitory, right? So, what are the things that are going to get more "quote unquote" back to normal? God willing, when the pandemic kind of concludes, and what are some of the things that are here to stay? Probably all of our speculations and guesses on what is here to stay and what isn't. I'd say certainly we think that telemedicine is here to stay, and many people have valued the convenience and access of telemedicine and affordability of telemedicine in ways they hadn't prior to the pandemic. Similar to you all, I think that some of the kind of flexibility and freedom of work and kind of ways to work and ways to build and grow a business have certainly changed in Fiverr's benefit as well. But it'll be interesting to see, and I think that the brands that can understand which of these changes are permanent, which of them are fleeting, and build experiences to the ones and the things that are permanent are going to be positioned to succeed.
Totally. Well, always a pleasure. And yeah, thanks for taking the time to chat with me and to chat with us. And to everyone listening, thanks for joining. And I guess I hope you enjoy the rest of the Fiverr Business Marketing Evolution Summit. And yeah, we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.